Hello and welcome to the Ka0s Podcast. I butchered that. Jeez, we've been doing this for how many episodes? Oh man. I'm Fetch, and with me today we got Neko
Hey everyone.
and Kuma.
Yo.
So, before we get into things, I do want to say, recently there was the first Lotus event. The Lotus series powered by Ka0s. I personally think there was some of the best games that we've had in recent tournaments in there. It was a good games, very good tournament.
A good consistency of all the games that appeared on stream. Just all of them were amazing.
Yeah. If you want a breakdown of that, go ahead and check out Comedian. Ian actually won the event, and he made a video breaking down the top 16 for that. And I'd highly recommend checking it out. Take a look. Obviously, Ian does great stuff. I'll say, if you want us to do breakdowns of that in the future, let us know in the comments. And if we get enough interest in that, we might start doing it. But for now, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. So, something that we were talking amongst each other, and Kuma especially bringing it up, is obviously we all know it's been mid-range meta. That's been like, it's all about the grind. It's all about value engines. But recently we've seen some blue farm lists start to cut Ad Nauseum. And we wanted to have a conversation about that and what that means for the larger meta as a whole.
Well, yeah.
So, Kuma?
Yeah. That and just the general trend towards more and more mid-range. I feel like decks are just getting more and more value engines packed into them in an attempt to out mid-range everybody else who's mid-ranging. It's like it's a race to the top or bottom, if you prefer, to be as mid-range as possible, to the point where I've noticed a lot of blue farm players starting to cut Ad Nauseum and saying things like Ad Nauseum is telegraphed and Ad Nauseum's not good now. There's too many 4-drops I want to run. And well, I'm the guy who thinks blue farm is a turbo deck that occasionally mid-ranges, so you can only imagine how I feel about that choice.
Well, and we're definitely going to have a conversation about that idea of blue farm being a turbo deck versus being a mid-range deck. But yeah, this is going to be an episode that is a whole lot of back and forth, a whole lot of, I'm guessing we're going to have some agreement and a decent amount of disagreement. But we're going to get right into this conversation because I look forward to seeing where this goes. And I have a feeling my perspective of things might change through this. So I hope the viewers enjoy.
Yeah, if I can just be pedantic for 1 second, I kind of hate the term mid-range in CEDH. Midway between what and what? Like, in 60 card, mid-range is supposed to be a deck that's like midway between aggro and control, where you try to, be bigger than the aggro decks and fast enough to get under the control decks. But in CEDH, it's like, what? Okay, we got turbo on one side. What's control? We don't really have control in this format. You could say it's stacks.
There are like 3 control decks.
Is it really? Also, is anybody playing dedicated stacks in current year? I mean,
I'd put stacks on a separate situation. Like, stacks is on the control spectrum, but stacks is not a control list. I would say there are a handful of control lists that exist in our format. Those pretty much just being Niv Mizzet and like, I don't know,
Rashmi,
Talion, Nimrus.
Talion.
You made Rashmi cry.
Rashmi's not a card. I'm sorry.
I think it's turbo on one side, stacks on the other, and mid-range is solidly in the middle, kind of taking the best of both worlds in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like, mid-range doesn't run the hard stacks, but it'll look at the stacks pieces that does well, Graph Digger's Cage, Curse Totem, things like that, and slot those in to make the best advantage and allow the games to go further to get more advantage while also being able to play fast when necessary.
Yeah, I agree with like everything you said there. Like, there is to some sense the actual spectrum. It is in some ways between turbo and stacks, right? At least for a long time, you'd get those mid-rangey decks. Some of them would have like Ad Nauseum in them. Some of them they'd have a couple of stacks pieces. And so you could argue they were trying to have the ability to go turbo and go stacks. But, I don't know. I'm mostly just being pedantic. Like, Control to me is reactive. Stacks is proactive. They have similar ends, but they get there like totally different ways. So, but I mean, when we say mid-range, what we really mean is like decks that are trying to play a longer game, like grind value, and then eventually just overwhelm and turn the corner. And that's what I think decks are trying more and more to do recently.
I was trying to think of Kurogashima as the other control deck. Kurogashima is one of the other control decks in our format, in my opinion. But
You really
that's
that?
not the topic.
I'd say that Storm, but it checks multiple boxes, I guess.
It's like a control Storm list.
When
it's
you have
weird.
a counter spell in your hand and like 3 Krarks out, you basically have total control of the game.
Exactly. That's why it's one of the few decks that can actually lock someone out from doing things. And you can just win by letting no one else play. So that's why I think it's control.
That's kind of where a lot of decks are right now, because we are seeing that priority of card advantage. You don't want to try to win first anymore. A lot of players are saying it's better to go off second, because everyone's just trying to draw cards and then have all the counter magic to deal with the threat and then win on their turn.
I mean, I think to some degree that was always true, but I think we maybe got away from it a little bit. Even so, like if you have a hand that wins on turn 2, like you're not throwing it back. Like even now, like winning early is still plenty good as long as you have the ability to recover from it.
So I think the important thing is you need that ability to recover. If you have a hand that all it does is a win attempt on turn 2 with no protection, unless your command zone gives you recovery, it's risky to keep that.
Yeah,
hand.
like when's the last time anyone played Cody? Like that's what people are trying to avoid, right? I go for it on turn 2 or 3, and then if it doesn't work, I'm just going to sit around.
And even trying to go for it turn 2 doesn't feel as safe when everyone feels like they're mulliging for either Mystic Remore or Rhystic Study turn 1 or 2.
Yeah, but on the other hand,
pretty much.
Like the more of those value engines you cram into your deck, harder it's going to be to run the appropriate interaction. Like if you're mulling to a hand that has 2 value engines, is it also going to have a counter spell? Like if you're planning on the game to go long and someone at the table decides they're going to make it short, you could catch a bunch of people with their pants down.
You can, and I've done it. But the thing is, people aren't cutting counter spells for more value engines. They're cutting Ad Nauseum. They're cutting these big, splashy, like, win the game cards that if they get countered, you're screwed. Because you either play the counter magic or you play a value engine, and either way, you're happy. I do think people need to realize you need to start countering the value engine. That's something people need to start doing.
I mean, if you're going to counter an Ad Nauseum, why wouldn't you counter a One Ring? Like,
exactly.
I mean, obviously, Ad Nauseum is going to draw you a lot more cards a lot faster. But, like, if you let somebody resolve a One Ring, like, in 2 or 3 turns, you're going to be buried.
Yeah, Ad Nauseum wins the game that turn. One Ring wins the game in 2 or 3.
And I've seen the statistics. Like, Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study win more games of CEDH than any other cards. So it's like, if you're not countering that, like, why not? Like, I get it. You don't want to be the one who spends their Force of Will and blue card to stop the one guy's value engine, but maybe people should more often.
I think a big part of it is the only reason you want to counter someone else's value engine if you already have a value engine. If you don't have a value engine out, then putting yourself behind to stop someone from getting incremental value is not worth it, because it leaves you in a bad situation.
Well, I don't think you want to keep a hand that's just interaction and no way to, play a long game. Nobody mulls the Force of Will. So, I don't think that's really happening. But, I don't know if I'd call stuff like Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study incremental value. I've seen Mystic Remora come down and be better than an Ancestral Recall. I mean, I know what you mean, but it's like, let's be real about what that card can do. It's not just incremental value. It's here's a card that's restricted in Vintage oftentimes.
Honestly, if in our format I was given the choice between Mystic or like Rhystic Study, Mystic Remora, or Ancestral Recall, I would take the fish every time.
Yeah, absent shenanigans casting the Ancestral Recall a bunch, yeah, I would say probably too.
Like, Rhystic Study early sticks around. It's so good. I was playing a game the other day. I was 4th. I had a hand that had a turn 2 Rhystic Study and just interaction, and I ended up winning that game because there was someone in there who went for it turn 2, and I just had the interaction to stop them, and all that time I was drawing cards.
Yeah.
I love it when people fight when I have a Rhystic Study. Counter. I'm like, Let's go.
Exactly. And that's why control is good right now. That's why decks can be more controlling, because they are getting that refill. It's not card negative anymore. It's card neutral or better.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, I think a big shift that has happened is it always was where blue you have the crazy draw engines. But One Ring being neutral actually makes a big difference because it means you don't have to be in blue to play the slow game.
Yeah, but it's best in blue.
Well, yeah, you still having access to counter spells, especially free counter spells, as well as Ristic, Fish, Talion, like all of these things are obviously super valuable. But if you are in a situation where you're mulling down to 4 or even 3, and the 3 is a way to get out One Ring, then you are still in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I've been cramming One Ring decks into everything. Like, if my deck runs Mana Crypt, it probably runs One Ring, because sometimes you're going to get that hand. It's going to be like land Mana Crypt One Ring, and you get a free win. Like, what's the downside to playing One Ring in almost any deck? There isn't any.
Yeah, and that might be why Blue Farm feels the need to not run Ad Nauseum, because not only does it have the One Ring plus Ristic and Mystic, it also has something like Talion, for example. So it can draw passively as many cards as they would have gone off Ad Nauseum anyway, and have the advantage of saying things like, "Oh, I'm not an Ad Nauseum, guys. Don't worry about me."
I hate it when people are like, "Oh, I'm not on Ad Nauseum. My life total doesn't matter." That's not how it works. Especially if it's like, oh, you've got a One Ring in play, or like Sylvan Library. People are like, oh, I'm not on Ad Nauseum.
Yeah. If anyone tells their life total doesn't matter in current year, ask them if they're playing the One Ring. If they tell you no, they're a liar.
Yeah,
for real.
But if there's a Najeela player or another Ad Nauseum deck, you would probably prioritize them over the non-Ad Nauseum deck.
Prioritizing Ad Nauseum is valid,
Yeah.
But just because someone doesn't run Ad Nauseum doesn't mean pressuring their life total is worthless.
Yeah, guys, all life totals matter, okay?
But you don't have to worry about your life total as much if you're not an Ad Nauseum. It frees up more slots. It lets you play cards like Shieldred or Teferi, just better mid-range value pieces, which I think get more mileage right now.
Okay, guys, but hear me out. What if we play the One Ring and Ad Nauseum in the same deck?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about how One Ring is a crazy card, how Ristic and Fish both warp the format. But I do think we should go back to like why people are actually cutting Ad Nauseum. Because I personally understand the reasoning, but I don't necessarily agree with it.
Yeah, I don't agree with it at all. I think the reasoning is flawed. I think it's an extension of my CMC. I can't run Ad Nauseum. My CMC is too high. Like, if you ever hung around an Ad Nauseum player for long enough, they're eventually going to be like, I don't know, guys, my CMC is getting too high. Maybe I don't play this good 3-drop and I play this less good 1-drop instead. And I'm like, what's your average CMC? They're like, oh, it's like 1.3. What is it with this card? 1.31? So like every 3 Ad Nauseums, you're seeing 1 less card if you play the better 3-drop. Like, come on. I mean, but that's not entirely it. I think the more I think about it, the more I think what really set this off is the One Ring. I think the One Ring started us down a path that has led us to cutting Ad Nauseum. Because people want to run the One Ring. Okay, obviously, it's good. Costs 4 mana, so they go, oh, my CMC. They flip it off Ad Nauseum a couple times, like, I don't know. And then there's like Talion, and they're like, oh, do I want to flip that off Ad Nauseum? And then people start looking at Beseech the Mirror to kind of run like a second One Ring. They're like, I don't really want to flip that off Ad Nauseum. I've even seen some people play Roaming Throne because it doubles up on like Timna triggers. It doubles up on like Esper Sentinel triggers. I mean, I think that's a little deep, but the more of that stuff you try to run, like Ad Nauseum does look less and less good. Do I think, I think you can run a couple of those cards and Ad Nauseum just fine. I think way too much is made out of that. But here's the other thing. Like, even if you don't run Ad Nauseum as I instantly win card, once upon a time, there was this thing called a value Naus, and you could technically still do that in your deck with all your 4 CMC value engines. Like, maybe you don't treat Ad Nauseum as I win the game instantly, but like, for 5 mana, you're going to draw more cards than all those other cards I named put together. So, like, maybe we don't cut it and just kind of change how we use it?
I don't know if you do draw more, though, anymore. Like, there's just so many pieces in Blue Farm especially. I'm of a mind that it's not right to cut Ad Nauseum, but I don't think it's wrong either. You could make an argument either way, and I think the decks still work very well in their own rights.
I mean, Ad Nauseum is usually 30 plus cards. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've very rarely seen a One Ring draw 30 plus cards. It happens.
I've not seen an Ad Nauseum draw 30 plus cards, so if you've seen that, please let me know.
Do it all the time.
I feel like Ad Nauseum gets like.
I mean, 20 something is probably more realistic, but like 30 is definitely the thing you can do. Maybe you don't have to because you've already got the win before then, but.
I'm trying to think about how many cards I typically draw off of Naus, and it's probably in the 20 plus range, but it's also like 20 plus range with a lot of those cards not being relevant.
Well, I mean, a lot of the cards you draw off any engine aren't going to be relevant.
Well, true.
I mean, I guess that there's a downside to that. Drawing 20 cards in one turn in some ways can be worse than drawing like 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. Because if you can't use them all, you got to discard them. Like a thing I think people should do more often in the format is like, let's say somebody plays an early Mystic or Ristic, and then someone at the table, does the bad, not pro-social thing and feeds the fish a bunch. And the guy's got like 8, 9 cards in his hand. At that point, I feel like you might as well just keep feeding him yourself because A, you don't want to be the only guy not feeding the fish and falling behind. B, once he has 8 or 9 cards in his hand on like the second turn of the game, he can only play so many of those on his next turn. He's only got like 1 land or maybe 2 lands out to begin with. And so he's got to discard quite a few of those. So the marginal value of giving him an extra card when he has like 2 lands and 10 cards in hand is pretty small. Now, if it's late in the game and he's got all the mana in the world, then yeah, maybe not. But like someone plays an early Adnos God, someone plays an early Mystic Remora, somebody else feeds it. I think at that point, it's probably more correct than not for you to feed it as well, because those extra cards the guy's drawing once he's already got a full hand and no mana aren't going to be as impactful, and you don't want to fall behind.
But how often do actually discarding the cards come into play? Because if anything, you're still hand sculpting.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's nothing. I'm just saying drawing and then discarding is less powerful than drawing by a considerable margin.
Yes, but if someone if they printed a fish, except for it was in red and it was a loot rather than just a straight draw, it'd still be a busted card.
Oh, of course. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, like, if the guy doesn't have the mana to take advantage of all these cards he's drawing, he's going to have to discard a bunch of them. That's much less bad for you than if he has like all the mana in the world that could play them all.
But if he gets enough cards to get the cards that he needs to win, then it's still pretty good. And worst case scenario, you're fueling the breach if the deck's on red. I think you do still have to develop, but I think just feeding them a ton of cards isn't necessarily the answer.
Don't feed them just to feed them, but like if you need to develop yourself. Like don't fall behind because someone played a fish and then like somebody else played a bunch of cards and fed it. Like at that point, I'm gonna keep up. If the guy who played fish draws even more cards, I don't care.
Sacrificing your own game plan very rarely puts you ahead in that situation. There are niche scenarios.
I'll tell you what, though, I don't think anything triggers me more in a game of CEDH than somebody feeding a fish with a signet. I just want to like reach across the table. It's like, guys, if you're gonna feed him, at least feed him a good card. Feed him with the Soul Ring. Feed him with a One Ring. Feed him with your own Ristic Study. A signet? You needed the signets that badly? You couldn't wait? Like, come on.
Your absolute hate of talismans and signets is kind of hilarious to me.
I mean, sure, I probably hate them more than I should, but at the same time, should you really be feeding fish with a signet? Like, come on, tell me you should actually really do that most of the time.
I mean, if you're playing one card and that one card's a signet, it's still 1 additional mana on your next turn, plus a colored mana. I mean, it's still good.
I mean, if you're really going to do something good with it on the next turn, then maybe, but like, I see people who just like play the game like the fish isn't there. It's like, I'm going to play this signet and pass. On my next turn, I'm going to do nothing with the signet. I'm like, well, why'd you play the signet?
Well, I think that's for any card, right? People may be a little too liberal with how they feed these draw engines nowadays, especially in maybe like the Swiss of a round, people not respecting it as much. You don't want to not acknowledge them, but whether it's a signet or a Ristic Study, you have to weigh if the card you're going to give that player is less than the value you're going to get off this piece on your next turn.
Right. Like if somebody feeds a fish with like their own fish, like nobody at the table goes, oh my God, why did you do that? And like, to be fair, Neko, if somebody did the same thing with a Soul Ring, they played a Soul Ring, didn't use the Soul Ring, guy drew a card, didn't use the Soul Ring on their next turn, and I noticed that, I'd be unhappy about that too. I'd be like, why'd you play the Soul Ring? You could have played this anytime you wanted and not fed him a card. So, I mean, to be fair, like, yeah, I should be equally angry if somebody did that with any spell. But I don't know. You know me and signets, right? They make me rage.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with a not feeding the fish pact.
I don't know if I entirely agree with that. I think in certain decks, not feeding the fish is like, so for some things like Blue Farm especially, if you play out a fish and all the fish does is time walks, why are you complaining about that? Like, you are making it where no one else can cast their things. Obviously, fish specifically, you have mana dorks that can get around it, and obviously people can still play lands. But if you can still play out all of your acceleration and all of the stuff that you want to play, and everyone else is just like, I'm going to pass through, that's not bad. Like, that's great.
No.
I would pay a 1 mana card for that.
I agree to an extent. I do think that, yeah, that's the ideal solution, but there are also plenty of times, especially when a player mulligans down enough, where they may have fish and nothing else.
True.
Yeah, those hands are always a risk. But like, to me, I think it depends on the kind of deck you're playing. If you're playing a deck that wants to get to the mid game and everyone's passing their turn, you're pretty happy. If you're playing something more turbo and nobody's feeding your fish, you're probably like, come on, guys, feed it so I can win already.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Where we're at right now, right? Every deck is trying to get to that mid game. Decks don't want a turbo right now for the most part.
Pretty much. And I really feel like that can be exploited. And I've got some pretty good ideas on how to exploit that.
I think before we get too much further, I want to talk about, I mean, obviously, big thing is Blue Farm cutting Ad Nauseum. But we've seen decks that could technically run Ad Nauseum not be running Ad Nauseum for a while now. Number one thing that comes to my mind is big conversation around both Tivit and Atraxa of whether they should be running Ad Nauseum. And that's much less controversial than Blue Farm. And at this point, a lot of people have cut it. Just straight up.
Yeah, and the more I think about it, like, I'm not saying they're wrong to do so, but I think maybe instead of cutting Naus, we just kind of reevaluate it. Like, I remember about probably 2 years ago or so, I tried to submit a deck to the database, and it was a black deck that didn't run Ad Nauseum. And it was not like, it was like Lathril, okay? It was like enough stacks to buy time for Lathril to slay the table. And the deck was surprisingly decent. I was winning about a fourth of my games with it on the Nexus. So I'm like, well, okay, this deck is not a complete meme. Like, is it the best deck in the format? No, but like, it's winning its fair share. So maybe get it on the database and see what happens. And they told me no, which was in hindsight probably correct of them, although I pitched a fit at the time. But my point is, I did not run Ad Nauseum. And I said, one of the reasons we didn't put that in is, why the heck aren't you on Ad Nauseum? And I'm like, well, because I can't just win off of it. And they're like, well, yeah, but you could still do a value end of turn Ad Nauseum, and that'd be really strong for you. It's like, so like, why aren't you running Ad Nauseum? I was just kind of like, and it's like, I feel like a couple years ago we had people who thought you should value Ad Nauseum in a lot of decks, and I feel like Tivit and Atraxa, I mean, yeah, you're not going to Dark Ritual the Ad Nauseum out on turn 2 and then try to like do a Breach line after that. Well, for one, you can't run Breach, but you're not going to try to do like a fast win after that. But I wonder if you used it as a value card in those decks, if it wouldn't be still worth a slot.
I think there are decks that could be worth a slot, but on the other hand too, and no disrespect to the deck list database because they do a lot of great work, but I do feel they get hung up on cards that should be in the deck just because it's in those colors. And I think players might feel that same way. You know, if it's in black, it should be on Ad Nauseum. I don't know. I think the meta can change, decks can develop, and saying that it has to be on a card anymore cuts off a lot of opportunities for the deck to go in different directions.
Well, I don't think you have to be on Ad Nauseum, but I think you need a damn good reason not to be if the deck can support it. And that's pretty much every deck in the format with black can on some level support it.
I don't even know if yes, they can on some level support it, but there's a lot of decks where running Ad Nauseum doesn't actually give you as much value as you would expect. Like, I still think Tivit should absolutely be on Ad Nauseum. I think it's just too good of a card, and you're in 3 colors, so you're not as like desperate to find space.
Yeah, the CMC in the Tivit deck is tiny. That deck runs so many cheap cards.
But in Atraxa, I hate that I'm saying this. I think it might actually be correct to not run Ad Nauseum in Atraxa, specifically because you have, I don't want to say better things to do with your mana, but you have plenty of other options to do with your mana, and You don't always win off the Ad Naus. It's not a consistent flip into a win. It's not 5 mana, nearly kill yourself, win the game. It's 5 mana, draw a good amount of cards that you could do with other things anyways that are less of investment and harder to count.
Yeah, the thing with Atraxa is you have 7 mana like Ad Naus spread over 2 or 3 turns in your command zone, which makes the marginal value of running 5 mana Ad Naus in your deck a lot less. I have started piloting Atraxa a little bit recently. And when I first was like hearing about the deck, I was thinking like, oh, okay, you just like ramp out Atraxa and then like flicker her or something. You just kind of storm off and win that turn. And that's not really how the deck works. You play her, you maybe do something immediately, and then like the turn after, you go absolutely bonkers nuts. And if you don't win the game, you basically create a state nobody's coming back from. Is more how the deck works. So like to me, you don't have Ad Nauseum in your command zone, but you have something that does a pretty amazing Ad Nauseum impression over 2 turns in your command zone, and it's a creature, which makes it about 1,000,000 times harder to interact with, which is something I definitely want to talk about here, because I think if people are going to start cutting Ad Naus and the format slows down considerably, I think creatures is where you're going to want to be, and I'll talk more about that when we get to it.
I do think for Atraxa, it has also clones, which no other deck can really use to the same effect.
Oh god, yeah. Is there anything better to clone than Atraxa? Like, not really. Maybe a Dockside.
Atraxa...
Cloning a Dockside to get your Atraxa.
Cloning a Dockside, yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah. Tivit, I could see an argument to run Ad Naus in. I think Tivit's in a place where I've heard a lot of Tivit players say they're struggling to try to win under the rounds right now, so maybe trying to speed the deck up with Ad Naus could help a little bit, especially because some players aren't wanting to get Tivit out as early. Could be something there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Tivit can be perfectly fast, but the problem is when Tivit's being fast, it's very telegraphy. Like, if you cast Tivit and pass and, like, tutored earlier in the game, people know what you're about to do, and they're not going to let you do it. Yeah. So, like, while Tivit can be fast, it's fast in a very telegraphed way. So I think that not only for the overall trends of the format, but just kind of for how Tivit is, I think people are trying to slow it down a lot. And maybe they're slowing it down too much, and maybe they need to try to be a little faster. I don't know.
Well, I think that's a lot of the fast decks, right? I don't know to say if they're telegraphed, but when you get in a pod with really good players, they're going to respect that a lot more and be ready to stop it. We see that in a deck like Rogsai, right? Rogsai can do very well in Swiss, but actually converting into Final Four from top 16 is difficult, and just because people know the deck and they know they have to respect it and will keep hands to deal with it.
I mean that all makes sense, but with stuff like that, I always wonder about sample size. Like, do we have like a huge sample of top 16 Rogsais that don't top 4? Or are we talking about a small amount of occurrences here? Like, what you say makes perfect theoretical sense. I just wonder about stuff like that sometimes. Like, is this reputation deserved? Did this happen like 3 times? The one notable pilot who wrote an article about it, and that's why everyone believes it.
It's definitely happened more than 3 times, but
yeah, but like, I mean, to one guy who like then wrote an article or something.
So tournaments are still, while we definitely have a lot more of them happening now than we used to, getting good data. And when I say good data, I'm talking about good data from like statistical analysis point of view, which is you need thousands of instances, if not more.
Depends on what you're analyzing,
it's
but yeah,
really hard. Yeah, exactly. So it kind of is hard, and especially when it comes to a game like ours where pilot skill plays a huge part into it, and seeing what the meta is on that day, much less in that season, is also relevant. So it's hard to say whether it's statistically accurate, but it's definitely a factor that it has some truth behind it.
Yeah. The other thing is, too, like, speaking of metas, like one of the big thoughts I keep having about like this current trend away from Ad Nauseum into mid range is like, what changed? Like, obviously the One Ring and some other cards happened, but like you could have done similar things for a very long time. Like, there's no reason like now was necessarily the right time to do it. Like, if you had run all that's value engines like 2 years ago, would you have done badly? Was there something different? And like on one hand, you've got the One Ring and Talion and all that stuff, but on the other hand, it's like, did we just not think of this? And then like, we kind of had a little group think and decided to move in this direction. It's kind of a mystery to me, because like I think a lot of this fruit was there to be picked 2 years ago, and we just decided we wanted to add Naus, and now we decided we don't. And I don't feel like a whole ton has changed.
No, I agree. And oftentimes the meta isn't something necessarily changing, it's people's perception of it that's changing.
Mhm.
Like, we had Ad Nauseum meta, we had Turbo. The natural response to that was to slow the game down through stacks. Stacks became prevalent, rule of law became prevalent. Decks couldn't turbo off, so they had to slow down, start playing these mid-range value pieces, and they see all these good value pieces are being printed, plus we're getting more. Shieldred, Talion, the One Ring, Esper Sentinel, Archivist, so many things, right, that are coming out. Now players are running mid-range. Mid-range is doing very well under stacks. They're beating stacks. Stacks isn't really good anymore because people are mid-ranging. Now we're just at mid-range.
Well, and the thing is, mid range also kind of beats turbo, which is one of the things that's like with metas. Typically, you have it where it's like, okay, you have a shift here, you have a shift here, you have a shift here, and it results in kind of a rock paper scissors game. But right now, mid range, I think for two reasons. One that I'll come up with shortly. Mid range kind of doesn't have a losing deck. There's not a strategy that beats mid range a majority of the time. And part of the reason why I think that is also part of the reason why I think right now value engines are king where they weren't a couple years ago. And that's because the table, and so the format has matured where players are more aware of the threats involved in the format and players are more responsible as a table.
Mm-hmm.
I've been looking to insert this for a while. I sort of disagree with you. I do think there is one kind of deck that actually does just crush mid-range in its current iterations. You guys ready for a hot take? That's going to be double spicy because it's coming from me and about things I've said in the past.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this.
I honestly think that one of the best things you could run into like generic mid-range loaded with value engine deck is like Naya. Think about it. Take something like Rocco Cabaretti Caterer. If you build like the most filthy all-in turbo Rocco Cabaretti Caterer deck, your whole line, everything you do is a creature spell. What do people have a hard time interacting with in this format? Creature spells. What does a deck like Turbo Rocco lose to? It loses to Ad Nauseum, because Ad Nauseum is like a turn, half a turn faster. What else does it lose to? Literally any stacks piece. What do we just say people aren't running? Ad Nauseum, stacks pieces. If you just build like the most like turn 3 Rocco deck in the world, all these mid-range value people can be like, I have a Force of Negation in hand. You cast Rocco into Dockside and then hard cast an Emil. I guess I lose the game now. All those artifacts and enchantments they're playing for value, you have Dockside Extortionist in your command zone. I really think if you build like a nasty Turbo Rocco deck, you will crush these mid-range decks hard. I actually witnessed that at a tournament like fairly recently. A guy brought like Turbo Rocco and just ran ragged over mid-range decks all day. I was in his pod twice. He ran me over twice. I was like, this is a thing. I think this is a thing.
Before I give a proper response and say why there are weaknesses to that game plan, I just want to get this on record. Kuma, the Naya should be dead in a ditch. Don't ever bring it to tournaments. Like, that Kuma is saying this right now?
Okay, I'll say this. 6 months ago, that is not where you wanted to be. This is like a broken clock is right twice a day. Like people have been playing Naya for years, just happen to be correct now because the meta shifted in exactly that way. I'm not even saying every Naya deck. I'm talking about Naya decks that are like insanely focused on creature-based combos. If you're trying to cast like instants and sorceries and enchantments, I don't think I agree with you. But if you're playing something that's just like turbo all creature combo, like I think Rocco's the perfect example because your commander is a tutor who's a creature, and they're looking at the hand, they're looking at Flusterstorm, looking at Fierce Guardianship, they're looking at Force of Negation, and they're like, oh, these don't work. I guess I die now. So I'm saying is if we truly shift into a metagame with not much Ad Nauseum and not much stacks and a bunch of artifact and enchantment-based mid-range value decks that are trying to slow the game down, if you build like turn 3 Rocco, I think you're going to run over them. And that's not something like the Naya players have known all along. That's something like the meta just shifted in a way that made the thing they've been doing for a long time suddenly the correct thing.
I agree to an extent, but mid range right now too. Yes, it's not stacks, but and we talked a little bit about this before we got on live, but they're taking the best stacks pieces that don't hurt their decks and running them. So
Yeah.
Grafdigger's Cage, Curse Totem, and not only that, even if there is a deck that can play under them well, midrange is very good about looking at those decks, teching against them, and just hating them out of the format. Look at Nagila. Nagila is one I would say could do the turbo plan, but gets so much hate right now for that exact reason, and it actually makes the deck not unplayable, but less playable in the format as a whole.
Oh yeah, and I mean mid-range could adapt to that, but like I think you're kind of in a sweet spot right now where the mid-range people haven't adjusted their interaction package to not worry about turbo so much. I think miscast is starting to fall out of lists like crazy. Like miscast was basically a response to turbo. But there's still a bunch of force of negation, fierce guardianship, and I mean you're not going to cut those because they kill other people's value engines and win lines. But you're not seeing a whole bunch of people adding things to the deck like I don't know, stern scolding, or people maybe runs one of swords or pad. What are you running to interact with creatures in a typical mid-range deck? Maybe one or two bounce spells, maybe one dedicated creature removal piece, and like Force of Will. Maybe you got two stacks pieces. Maybe you got Grafdigger's Cage and like Curse Totem or something. That's not a lot of ways to interact.
Cage, you've got Curse Totem, you've got Opposition Agent, which while Rocco is a May, so it is not completely like they win the game off of casting the Opposition Agent. They still lock you out of winning the game.
I've noticed Oppo trending down recently. I mean, it's still there, but I've seen it trend back a little bit.
It has trended down.
Yeah, it's definitely trended down.
I'm not saying you can't beat this deck. I'm just saying, like, I think it's very well equipped to take advantage of current play patterns.
I think one other big weakness of creature-focused decks right now is Bowmaster exists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, you don't need to build Rocco full of X1s. Like, you literally just get Dockside, get Emil. Like, I could show you lists. Like, the Rocco list I'm toying around, I think runs like one toughness mana dork. Like, and I mean, it runs like Wirewood Symbiote, which you don't want to die, but you don't actually need to win either. Like, the deck is actually pretty Bowmaster resistant.
True,
Fair
but
enough.
there are even pieces like Blind Obedience that are seeing a lot of play right now.
Oh yeah, Blind Obedience sucks for you. That is true. Yeah. That is true. Blind Obedience sucks. The deck's not perfect.
Mindbreak Trap is a piece. Touch of the Spirit Realm, like that's what the value of these decks are, right? Because you're not running like an Ad Nauseum package, it allows you a lot more flexibility to tech into specific pieces you need to cover your weaknesses.
Isn't Mindbreak Trap mostly a response to Ad Nauseum, though? If people start cutting Ad Nauseum, isn't Mindbreak Trap going to follow?
I don't think it is, because Mindbreak Trap, because it can hit creatures and it's an exile. Because it doesn't actually counter, it means that things that are uncounterable can get hit by Mindbreak Trap. And the fact that, yes, obviously, it's better for someone who's storming off, but it's way easier to turn on Mindbreak Trap than you think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying the card's bad. I'm just saying I thought most people were running it to stop Naus, and if Naus is going away, some of the Mindbreak Traps might as well.
I mean, Naus is a big one. Breach, though, is still prevalent. Could stop that pretty well. Thoracle, it does a good job at stopping, because usually you're playing another spell before that. Like, it checks a lot of boxes, and even paying the 4 mana for it just to hardcast it isn't a big ask, because right now no one wants to tap out, because you tap out, you're just leaving your pants down, and you most likely lose.
Yeah.
Or another deck that I think plays well into this is Sisay Weatherlight Captain. Because once again, you play a creature and then you stop casting spells.
On Sisay, not on Ad Nauseum. Another deck that could run it, but you don't.
Yeah, but I mean, that one, you've got like so many weird big mana planeswalkers and other things in it. There is actually just about, there's not a lot of great ways to abuse that. I mean, wouldn't be the worst card you could put in the 100, but I'm pretty confident saying no on that one. You're not on Thoracle, you're not on Breach, you're not on any kind of fast win you can do right after. You're generally like can tutor most of the stuff out of your deck anyway. So if you like draw a couple of your planeswalkers, that's not the greatest thing. I mean, if somebody said you can resolve a free Ad Nauseum while I'm playing the deck, I'd be like, cool, thanks. But like, I'm pretty confident on that one. That one just has no way to take advantage of immediately drawing 30 cards. Like, you're going to draw the 30 cards and be like, well, here's a land, here's a Mox Diamond, here's a 1 mana card, I'll pass.
I actually disagree on that statement pretty heavily, because the main draw to Sisay is that it's so adaptive to the meta and can not only play under the meta, but change its slots to fit into it, right? If it's you need stacks, Sisay can be a great stacks deck. It can be a great toolbox deck when you need it to be. You need like some value, it can get the mid-range value. And Sisay actually doesn't make a half bad turbo commander. I've seen some decks that do run things like Thoracle and Breach because Sisay has the ability to get a tutorable silence right onto the field with something like Teferi.
Oh yeah, I mean you can build Sisay different ways. I'm talking about like the current iteration of it, which is like kind of weirdly between like mid range and, if you ask me, a little turbo. Not you're trying to speed win, but like I feel like you're trying to win faster than most other mid range decks are with Sisay. So like Sisay is kind of like
I
a
agree.
little more on the turbo-y end of mid range. So yeah, you could build it as a turbo deck. You could build it as a dedicated stacks deck. But I will say this: I do not think Sisay in any form is a toolbox deck. I feel like if you want a toolbox deck, you have many, many better choices. Like toolbox decks are my favorite thing in all of Magic. And like one of the reasons I hated Sisay for so long is everyone's like, this is a toolbox deck. And I'm like, but it's not a good toolbox deck. Like Sisay doesn't toolbox as well as you think. You need something out already to even let her activate for a toolbox. And then you're paying 5 mana for a toolbox piece. Like Yisan is not a good deck, but Yisan toolbox is a hell of a lot better than Sisay does.
Weirdly enough, I think Sisay toolboxing is a lot like how Rocco toolboxes, where Rocco you don't want to be a toolbox deck a lot of the time, but you can be in emergency situations.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think Sisay right now is a toolbox deck. She's not. She's a combo deck right now. But
Yeah.
once upon a time, having the ability to toolbox out the stacks piece you need to counter the exact situation, I find value in it. That's back when things were more stacksy. I don't think that's the case anymore, but it could down the road be what we need again if the meta changes, and it will change at some point. I don't know when and I don't know how, but it will continue to
I mean, you
develop.
can get there. There's just a lot of hoops to jump through.
I think before we get too much further into our Sisay conversation, because this is obviously not done, I want to circle back to why people are cutting Ad Nauseum, and the more that I'm thinking about it, the more it's because I feel like Ad Nauseum a lot of time is just a dead card. Like, yeah, it wins you the game. Not for every deck, but for the decks that know how to use it well, it wins you the game. The thing is, it's 5 mana that you need to hard commit to.
What do you mean?
And that is not as easy as it sounds.
No, but I mean, we're running 4s you have to hard commit to left and right. 5 is bigger than 4, sure, but it's not dramatically bigger. And there's a lot more upside.
No, I think Fetch is onto something here because if you try to add Naus early, usually you leave yourself shields down. Maybe you have one backup, but if you're casting all these spells into the Rhystic Study, very likely someone has an answer. And if you try to hold it for later, then there's a possibility that there's already going to be more interaction now because people have drawn more cards to stop you. So the window might not be there anymore. And by the time you do get to a window, you've probably gotten so much advantage of your own that you just have the cards in hand that you need to win then and there.
Yeah, I mean, Ad Nauseum is dead if you can't cast it, and it's dead if you have like 20-ish life. So, like, yeah, there are a lot of situations in which it doesn't do much for you. But when it does do for you, it's a 1-card, 5 mana win the game. And you gotta balance that against the fact it's useless sometimes.
Okay, Kuma, this is me saying this. I am one of the biggest Ad Nauseum fans that are like, Ad Nauseum is my baby. Ad Nauseum is what I will pretty much always play. The closest I go to a non-Ad Nauseum deck is like Atraxa or maybe Sisay or whatever. These decks that are not on Ad Nauseum but are still playing a very similar style as far as being that hyper aggro mid-range on the side of things, but like you're not slow, you're not wanting to play this super long game. But that's me saying there are situations where I look at my hand and it's like Ad Nauseum doesn't do anything here.
Sure.
And I'd rather see something else.
But by no means do I think Ad Nauseum is dead. It's just if a deck has enough advantage, I don't think it's an auto include anymore, which I think is why we're seeing that divide in blue farm players right now.
I still don't think blue farm should be cutting it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I still think blue farm absolutely knows how to make mad use out of Ad Nauseum. But I kind of get it.
Yeah, like I thought the strength of Blue Farm was like you can be a turbo deck or a mid-range deck as need arises. If you lose your ability to turbo, there's got to be a better mid-range commanders you can run than Tymna and Crom, even though they are very good mid-range commanders. Like if you're just going to mid-range, I feel like you have better commander options.
I find it hard to find a better card advantage engine in those colors that isn't Tymna
In
Crom.
those colors, but like overall.
Yeah, but four of the best colors, honestly, it's hard to beat.
Sure.
Yeah, unless you want to go for 5-color and go for Sisay, then it's like, which I mean, going for Sisay is not anything wrong. Like Sisay is an amazing deck.
No, like we all had it in our top 5, right? Like it's a great deck.
Yeah, Sisay is amazing. I guess you could go other 5-color things. You could go Najila, you could go Kenrith, but like, if you want to play the best 4 colors in the game, what is better than Blue Farm?
I mean, in those colors, I don't know. I was just thinking like, and maybe I didn't think about it enough. I was just thinking like, okay, if you're not going to do the classic Blue Farm plan, should you look to other commanders? And maybe the answer is no. Maybe it is no. But to me,
I think there are other commanders that you can look to. You can look to Atraxa, but you give up red. You can look to Ka0s Crom.
I mean, if you're going to mid-range, I think Atraxa mid-range is harder than just about anything.
Ka0s Crom is pretty deadly at mid-range.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. Or, like, Atraxa, honestly. Like, Atraxa is one of the nastiest decks at mid-ranging that I've ever seen. Like, once you start copying Atraxa a couple of times, it's just like you're burying them. You're just burying them. So, like, I think there might be some combinations that mid-range harder than just Tymna Crom built to mid-range as hard as it possibly can. But maybe not. It's still in the conversation. I'm just saying, to me, the strength of Blue Farm is always the ability to switch roles. And if you remove that, like, is it even Blue Farm at that point? If you're not running Ad Nauseum, we can get into a whole debate about what farm means. But if you're not running Ad Nauseum, are you even a farm deck, or are you just Tymna and Crom now? Which is fine, I mean, but...
Whether it's Blue Farm or just Tymna Crom, I don't think it really matters at this point. But if you are giving up Ad Nauseum and going all in mid-range, you still, in those colors, don't have a better option.
Well, looking at it from another angle too, even if you cut Ad Nauseum, you really don't give up your ability to win early, right? Yes,
True.
you can't. I guess what you can do, quote unquote, turbo, but you can easily present an early Underworld Breach, an early Thassa's Oracle, Tainted Pact.
Yeah, but you're still diminished. Like if I have 2 tutors, I can tutor for Demonic Consultation and Thoracle, or I can tutor for Silence and Ad Nauseum. So like, yeah, you can still win fast.
Yeah.
And almost any deck in this format can pull off a turn 2 or 3 win. But I think if you cut Naus, you're greatly diminishing your ability to do so in Blue Farm.
So that raises a question. Our players must feel confident. There must be something the players are feeling that makes it worth that. And it probably is cards like Talion and the One Ring now. Cards that do get them a ton of advantage now that games are going longer. Lets them kind of slow ball it, right? So it's not probably a big ask to look at how many cards you get from a single Ad Nauseum and look how many cards a typical Blue Farm player deck gets in the current meta. Dude, they're probably pretty comparable.
The amount of cards drawn over a game for Blue Farm is stupid. Like between all the different draw engines, and typically you don't just get one draw engine out, you get like 2 or 3. You start out with one that draws you into another one that you can then play, and then it just keeps going, and it's like, it's dumb.
Heck, you have 2 in your command zone. That's how easy it is for that deck to get them.
Yeah.
But even looking back to our top 10 we did a couple months back, like 8 out of the 10 decks we each recommended were some form of advantage value piece, often card draw or ways to cheat out cards to get advantage that way.
Oh yeah, card drawing's always been good. I just wonder if people are taking it a little too far here.
Can you take it too far? We're probably going to find out.
Technically,
honestly.
yes. Practically, maybe not.
I mean, if you draw more than 99 cards, you have taken it too far. That's how this game works in most cases.
Literally lands and cards that draw you other cards, you have taken it too far. Like, that we can all agree on. But, like, I gotta wonder, though, if everybody really just, like, sets their deck for the mid-game and just tries to grind as much advantage as possible, like, what are they going to cut in order to do that? Are they going to cut, like, the cards that stop the fast wins? Are they going to cut like some interaction? Like, what are they going to cut? And if they cut the wrong thing, it's entirely possible you could come in and take advantage of it with the turbo deck again. If people are going to start to cut things that were in there in the first place to stop Ad Nauseum, like, I don't know, Fluster Storms and whatever else, like, maybe you sneak back in at that point, or you do what I said. And if, the interaction packages haven't adapted yet and everyone's trying to grind more mid-range value harder, run a very fast deck that's hard to interact with, like a pure creature-based Rocco list. Like, I think there are definitely ways you can attack this profitably. Now, are you going to win every game with that? No, but I've been really impressed watching like Rocco turbo-y lists like take apart mid-range decks. Like, I think it's a thing. I think someone's going to win a big event with something along those lines before too long.
Well, and I think right now the best turbo decks and why Rogsai is struggling so hard. I know Rogsai still has performances, but like Rogsai went from top 3 definitive deck to maybe top 10, and that's debatable. I think it largely comes down to the fact that even though Rogsai is very good at turbo, you don't have a backup plan in your command zone. And I think that really hits it.
You don't have a backup plan in your command zone for sure. And you're turboing exactly the way everybody expects you to, right? And people's interaction packages are geared to deal with instants and sorceries, and that's exactly what you're trying to do, and that's about all you can do.
Yeah, like I think some of the best turbo decks you have right now, Dahada has really good backup, and it can also be your primary win con. With Dahada doing value things and getting you mana and even cards to some extent, feeding you a ton of value. You have Tim Najeska, which card draw and interaction for the board and a combo outlet. I do, weirdly enough, think Corvold's actually in a really good spot for the meta right now. I understand
it's the same idea as Rocco, kind of.
Yeah, Corvold I think is a really good spot in the meta right now. It can be hard to stop, and you have a great backup with... You can either have Corvold be your backup plan, or you can have Corvold be your main win con, and it's just creature combos.
Yeah, exactly. I think creature combos is, if you want a turbo right now, if these really are the trends, they continue like this, I think creature combos is exactly where you want to be. Like, look at the creature combo decks again. I think some of them are going to put up some surprising results here pretty soon.
That brings us back to Sisay.
But before we go to Sisay, and like, right now the meta is just so open, right? So many decks that are performing are things we would have thought would never perform the way they are, but they actually have so many good cards that are being printed that they can keep up. Look at the Azorius Heliod deck we saw the other day.
Heliod.
Like, that deck, it's Azorius, right? And automatically that is something a lot of people brush off, but it has an effect that is so good right now because Flash is really strong, and with so much card advantage, you're able to play stuff out for cheap. The meta, I think, is just in a really strong place, and I like to see decks being able to perform. I like that people can still add Naus, because you will be able to get wins with Ad Nauseum, especially if you're looking outside of tournaments, best of one type situations, or even in tournaments, they'll perform. Decks without turbo can still do well. Stacks can even do well, if not in a time setting.
Masters. I went out and built it the next day. Stacks is back, baby. No, it isn't.
No, it depends on your definition of stacks, I'll say.
Yeah. So, yes, there are great decks in the format, but other decks are able to keep up in a lot of ways, which I find really healthy for the format.
I think the format's in a great spot, even though I do think Rhystic Study, if there's any card that deserves a ban, it's Rhystic. Like, that warps the format.
I would say Dockside, but yeah, that's probably number 2 and 3 are Mystic and Rhystic.
I think Dockside is a really powerful card, don't get me wrong, but I don't think Dockside shapes the format to the same extent that Rhystic does.
I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, Dockside Extorsus might be the most powerful card they've printed in the modern era. Like, holy shit.
Listen, I just don't want Corvold to be put in the grave because Dockside gets banned.
I mean, it would shake the meta up something fierce if Dockside went away. Like, I think Sisay loses a ton of power.
That's very true.
I think you see a hell of a lot less red. I think Dockside put red on the map, and then Breach came along and helped.
I don't know what you would ban. I don't think you ban Dockside or Ristic. I think you have to poke at it from different angles, because losing those cards, I don't think that's the way to go about it.
I mean, I don't think there's a problem, but like, I think if you had to get rid of one card, it should be Dockside, and I don't think it's especially close. Dockside's insane.
I disagree. But
And like Sisay, like you mull to 5, you keep a hand with Dockside, and oh look, I brought it all the way back and won. Go like mull to 5, go last. Doesn't matter. Dockside's that good if you build around it. Like Dockside
so is Ristic, though.
Dockside punishes your opponents for playing the game of Magic. Like they're casting artifacts to like get mana, and then they're casting value engines, and you go, haha, I get 16 mana for 2 good GG nerds.
Mull 5 go last turn 1 Ristic, you win the game. Mull 5 go last turn 1 One Ring, you win the game. Like, Dockside's great, don't get me wrong. I love Dockside. Very powerful card. But it's not like it is special as far as the fact that early Dockside wins you the game. And only certain commanders can do that anyways.
I mean, the fact it's 2 mana to make like often upwards of 8 or 9 mana immediately, and also a creature so you can combo with it and flicker it and do it again, like there is not a better mana engine like ever printed. Like it's stupid.
No, we can agree on that.
Yeah,
we can agree on that. But still, it's not like Dockside single-handedly. Dockside makes certain decks. It does not single-handedly warp the format for every deck. And Ristic, every deck that runs blue runs Ristic and wants to get a Ristic early and mulligans for Ristic early.
Every deck that runs red runs Dockside and wants to get Dockside early.
No, well, yes, but it's not like a Dockside is the only thing that you need to make a hand good. Ristic
It depends on how you build your deck. That's about all you need in Captain Sisay. Or not Captain Sisay. That's about all you need in White Captain Sisay.
Or, yeah, not in Captain Sisay.
No, because you still... I mean, yes, if you make enough mana, but that's... To make enough mana just to win with Dockside alone in Sisay, that's a big ask and usually doesn't happen early. You have to wait a couple turns or be up against like a Tivit or something like that will just pump out artifacts for you to take advantage of like nobody's business.
Oh yeah, I mean you want a deck that crushes Tivit, Sisay Weatherlight Captain. But I mean, here's the thing: like if you just have Ristic or Mystic and literally nothing else in your hand, a lot of people tell you shouldn't keep that, like unless you absolutely have to. Like those hands can get you nowhere too. Like you get in the pot of people who play correctly, or you draw like 2 or 3 cards off it and still don't have any gas. Like people will tell you not to keep a Mystic and Ristic and nothing else hand too. Now, I don't generally agree with that. Depends on the situation, of course, but I mean those cards can also get you nowhere by themselves.
I can agree with Mr. Kimura in that example, Kuma, but I do not see that for Ristic. Ristic is a consistent effect. It's one that will never go away, no upkeep cost. Having a turn 1 Ristic will never not get you cards.
It'll get you something, but there's going to come a point in the game people have enough mana that they start paying for most of your Ristic triggers, and it falls off a little.
Okay, how often
Dockside gets better the longer the game goes. I think Ristic gets worse the longer the game goes.
Yes, except for the longer the game goes with Ristic, if you've had it out early, you have drawn into enough cards where you now have gas to do your own thing.
Well, yeah, what I mean is, like, if you cast a Ristic on turn 10, that's less good than casting a Ristic on turn 2. If you cast a Dockside on turn 10, that's better than a Dockside on turn 2 a lot of the time.
Until you get into Counterspell Wars.
Who's counterspelling a Dockside? Nothing counterspells a Dockside. Force of Will?
Well, no.
Blue Blast?
But counterspells feed Ristic Study like nobody's business, because if you're countering a spell not on your turn, most likely you won't have the mana to pay for it.
It's true.
Yeah, but I mean, like, do decks run more counterspells or artifacts and enchantments?
Depending on the deck.
Generally more artifacts and enchantments, I would think, generally.
Well, yeah, but even for that, you're still taxing them. Like, are we going to say that Thalia is a card that people shouldn't run?
Yes.
When Ristic is Thalia, but better.
I mean, what is stronger, taxing someone or making a ton of fast mana? How many taxing effects have been banned in formats? How many fast mana effects have been banned in formats?
I don't want to look through all the formats.
I'm going to tell you right now, the answer is basically no taxing effects have ever been banned. And wasn't like Desperate Ritual banned in Modern for a minute? And that's not even a great fast mana card.
Yeah, no, no one's arguing both these cards aren't great. They both have their place. Dockside, once you get it down and there's enough mana, is wild. Ristic Study, when you get it down early and draw cards, wild. both have their
I mean,
place.
Dockside's also half your win. It's the best ramp spell ever and half of your combo. Like, if it was just one of those things, I could see your point, but it's both of those things. It's just like, it's so over the curve, I can't even believe it.
For Sisse, yes.
It's half your combo in a lot of situations, which means you still need the other piece of that combo.
Yeah, but it's half your combo, and it doesn't just sit around waiting for the other half. It generates you more mana than any other card in the game while it sits around and waits.
Having a dark side sit around isn't great because there are so many clone effects right now.
Yeah, but I mean, it does something while it's sitting around. I mean, sure, there are clones, and you got to be cognizant of that, but like, it's not just the best ritual ever printed by a million miles. It's the best ritual ever printed and half of a combo line.
None of us are saying Dockside is bad, but there's only a handful of decks that make it where Dockside becomes a truly broken card.
I think it's truly broken just by any deck. I've run it in dedicated stacks with Collector Roof because it's that broken. You play it, get 4 treasures, cast a roof. It's that good. Like, there's literally no deck that can run Dockside that doesn't want to. None. 0 zip. I would argue the same is probably true for Mystic and Ristic, but I just say more of a degree with Dockside.
Yeah, they're both auto-includes in their colors in all situations, I imagine. So when it works for both of them. Yeah.
This podcast took a turn.
It's no... They're no Displacer Kitten, but here we are, right?
Displacer? Yeah, it's no Displacer Kitten. What is Displacer Kitten combo with better than just about anything else? Is it Ristic Study?
True, you got me there.
Do we want to talk about how Talion is also a new card that is with the combo
Talion's
of Talion
little
and
younger
One
brother
Ring
who's like, "Can I play 2?" And you're like, "No," and he goes, "Mom." Like, Talion's good, but like, he's no One Ring, he's no Ad Nauseum, he's no any of the other things we just named.
There are people that are cutting One Ring for Talion, and because Talion, it's more situational, and it's like a bit harder to get out, mainly because it has mana pips. Like, you actually have to pay blue and black for it rather than just colorless. But also, it can definitely draw you more cards.
I mean, it could. I wouldn't bet on it.
I was kind of cold on Talion when it was first spoiled. I've realized that it's actually really good. It's a really good card. Like, is it broken? Is it top tier? No, but it's a card that people have brewed around and have stuck around, and that's kind of something we don't see every day anymore.
Oh yeah, no, it's good.
A lot of commanders
it's not
brewed.
going anywhere, and it shouldn't go anywhere. I just don't think it's quite on the same level as the other cards we've been discussing.
No, but it's another engine you have.
Yeah.
It's another card that you can get out and have you just destroy because you're drawing 20
people will be
cards.
casting Talion for the next decade or even more. Like, he is that good. It's just kind of like we've had so much other stuff recently that I think is a little bit better, that he's a little behind by comparison. Which is crazy to me. Like, should we really be having that many good cards?
If you were to ask me the top 10 cards that have been printed this year for CEDH, Talion probably makes the top 10.
Oh, easily. It's probably top like 2 or 3. Like, it's nuts.
Yeah, what else do you have on that list that Talion's not even...
Like, we're talking about 2023, right? Like, the One Ring, Talion, like, what's higher than those?
Bowmasters.
Okay, Bowmasters, maybe. I'll give you that. Maybe, yeah.
But that's my point, right? Like, it's a really good
easily,
piece.
Like, for sure. Like, it's not even an argument other than that, I don't think.
Well, you've got like Lotho coming in after.
Lotho's behind those cards, and Lotho is amazing, and it's behind those cards by a lot.
Yeah.
But that's the point, right? Like, if it's so high up on our list like that, it's a pretty good card.
Yeah, it is. I'm not saying it's not good. I'm just saying it's the One Ring.
True.
It's not far behind, though.
Not that far,
in my opinion.
It depends.
The fact that it's a creature kind of is a double-edged sword. Weirdly enough, because of swords. Swords to plowshares.
Yeah, thing people are cutting in 4-color decks.
I don't know if people have been cutting it.
They were for a minute. I think that slowed down some, but you don't see as much swords in like 4+ color decks as you used to. Dedicated creature removal may not be at an all-time low, but it's pretty close.
I think people have kind of swung back a little bit from that.
A little bit, but I still think we're at a pretty historic low here.
By the most part, I can see a reason for that being people wanting to just remove something temporarily, so we see more of that phase out kind of mechanic.
We want to be able to hit anything.
Its place.
So that's why you see a lot of bounce and not a lot of like thing that hits only creature, only artifact, and enchantment. Like, nobody's running Nature's Claim anymore. That card was everywhere like 2 years ago. Like, now I think almost nobody plays it. Maybe some like monocolor decks play it.
Well, that's because rule of law and stuff like that was around 2 years ago.
I mean, I guess.
I think the big thing that you've seen start to come in is Touch the Spirit Realm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What a flexible card that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to flicker your Dockside? 2 mana. You want to bounce something for a turn tech, sort of? 2 mana. You want to get rid of it forever? 3 mana. You want to combo with Displacer Kitten? 3 mana. Like, a card does a lot.
There's a reason why people missed it, because none of the stuff that it does at a like super efficient rate.
Yeah, that is exactly why I missed it.
But
I'm like,
also,
this is too much mana. It's cute, but that's too much mana. Also, it's uncounterable half the time.
The channel being uncounterable, you can do it at instant speed, you can do it through silence. It's like, what?
Yeah, these channel abilities are super strong, yeah. So Sisay, huh?
Do we really want to get into Captain Sisay after all that?
I mean, that depends on how far we're going into Captain Sisay, because I do think Captain Sisay, or not Captain Sisay, Sisay Weatherlight Captain. Captain Sisay is a completely different card. No offense to Captain Sisay. Honestly, kind of underrated in some ways, but also it's no Sisay Weatherlight Captain.
It's
2
not.
colors versus 5 colors is a tough comparison right there.
Hurts me to say it, but yeah.
Directly to the field as opposed to the hand, also kind of a big distinction between the two with the current meta. Not having to cast spells right now feels so good.
Oh yeah, like nobody's going to tell you Captain Sisay is better than Weatherlight Captain. I mean, the deck is probably better than most people think, but unless you're, oh god, what's his name for the 2,000 plus games? Unless you're Choir Boy, like, that deck's probably more of a meme than a dream.
Choir Boy's insane on that deck, though.
Yeah, like if you want to put it in Choir Boy levels of dedication, you can get somewhere, but for most people, that deck's going to be a meme and a dream. Not a...
Sisay Weatherlight Captain, though, like, the fact that I obviously it doesn't come up that often as far as like getting around deafening silence effects, but it does get around silence effects, which is very relevant.
Oh yeah, it's much harder to interact with than a lot of other combo decks, which I think is one of the draws to it. Because first of all, you have pure creature lines. You also have lines that require you to cast no spells on the turn you win. So like your options are you just go Dockside and it's all creatures and they can't interact with you and they get punished for playing the game. Or it's, I'm going to tutor a bunch of Planeswalkers straight to the battlefield, and they're going to be like, I have nothing for Planeswalkers. So, like, it's a very hard deck to interact with when it decides it's going to win. And it can put those wins out faster than a lot of other decks can as well.
Yeah, Planeswalkers get around your Swords to Plowshares. It gets around Graph Diggers.
Yep.
Because
Graph Diggers doesn't even shut the deck off. You go for a Planeswalker line.
Yeah.
And I will say this. I believe it is the best Dockside Extortionist combo deck in the format. Captain, or just say Weatherlight Captain is.
Or Corvold.
I honestly don't know if about Corvold to argue with you, but I would say, based on results, probably not.
You're probably... 5 colors is a difference.
Just say Weatherlight Captain. I mean, honestly, I would normally have told you number 2 is Kenrith. I'm starting to wonder if number 2 is Rocco, for like best Dockside deck. That's a bit of a hot take, but like, I think that might be number 2.
Yeah, but Sisay can run both Rocco and Kenrith, and
but
so
Rocco's
really,
not your command zone.
What are we even talking about here?
I'm just saying, Rocco is Dockside in your command zone. Like, that is fairly unique.
Yeah, it is.
Rocco's good, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it quite matches up to Sisay.
I mean, overall, no, but like into the current meta, I think there's a chance.
I don't know. Rocco was a deck we saw so much of for a time, and then it kind of fell off. And I don't know where it went, but I want to see it again. So if that's what it takes to get Rocco back, why not?
I think it was one of those decks that had a hard time settling on a list.
Rocco.
Like, you can build it as dedicated stacks. You can build it as, like, food chain. You can build it as, like, all-in Dockside Turbo. And, like, I don't think most people at the time when it came out were building it as all-in Dockside Turbo. I think it was mostly stacks and food chain. And I think the correct way to do it, at least into the current meta, is all-in on Dockside. And I think if you do that, it's going to be up there. We've had some spicy takes on this podcast that turned out, right? Fetch, you were pumping Thrasios Dargo and then it topped. I was pumping Tavesh Krom and then it topped. Like,
yep.
I'm not going to say I'm 100% right about this, but I would not be surprised at all if something Rocco Dockside-esque tops in the near future.
Obviously, we just need to see Teferi top soon for Neko.
I mean, to be fair, Krom and Tavesh had already topped by that time. Thrasios Dargo had already topped, so taking the easy pull there, guy.
Everyone's topping. Where are my bottoms?
Yeah, Neko definitely had the spiciest take out of all of us.
It's okay, Neko. One day your dream will come true.
If I ever get the chance to play in one of the tournaments, I'll rep Teferi for everyone.
You better. You got to prove yourself right on that. You got a lot to prove with that one.
I think we have enough time where we have been hearing Kuma complain about people building Sisay wrong forever. We've been talking about Dockside. We've been talking about how Sisay is such a good combo deck. I'm going to let you have your soapbox for at least a few minutes.
Okay, stop me if you've heard this one before. I can run whatever I want in Sisay Weatherlight Captain. Like, I hated this deck for the longest time because every time I'd look at a list, I'd be like, why are you running that bad legendary creature? Why are you running that bad planeswalker? Like, you're in 5 colors, run the good stuff. And it took me so long for someone to build a list that was just like the bare minimum of crap and all the good stuff that like made me actually want to try out the deck. That and I had it misconstrued as a toolbox deck, which I mean, yeah, I can sort of do, but it's not really a toolbox deck at its core. So like I was like, I'm the toolbox guy. You know, where's my toolbox? This is kind of a weird way to toolbox. But anyway, like I have never seen a deck this good where people seem insistent on building it differently and, in my opinion, poorly. Like every time I look at a Sisay list, there's at least 3 cards in it that just I throw up in my mouth a little. It's just like, oh, why? I'm just gonna flip through a couple of lists here quickly on a EDH top 16. Let's see. This one here's got Olivia mobilized for war. Got to give haste to creatures. You know Tyvar is already in the deck and part of a combo line, right? Like, do you need Olivia on top of that? Like, is that the worst card in the world you could run? No, but like, come on, you can do better than that. Urtai Resurrected. Yeah, I get he's a flexible answer to everything, but he's also 4 mana. Like, come on, you're in 5 colors. You have better answers than 4 mana removal. Like, what else we got here? Adric Mathematical Genius. That's absolutely adorable. You just set it out there and nobody can pass his oracle, I guess. Or, you know, maybe you'll live the dream and copy a Dockside trigger, but like, is that really what you want to be casting? Like, and I mean, I can go on here, but it's just like, I just kind of like, do you guys have any idea, like, what about this deck just makes people want to run every weird, bad, legendary card in the world?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, the fact that it tutors a legendary is definitely a big upside.
Tutoring for a bad card is still a bad card, though. Like,
true.
So, I agree with most of your takes here, Kuma. There are a lot of cards that I see come up consistently in Sisay lists that I look at and it's like, I don't agree with this. But at the same time, I'm sure there are players who look at my Sisay list like, why are you running that? I get that there's a lot of flexibility you can do for the deck, and I can see why doubling up on effects like Olivia could be good, because haste in Sisay is really strong. Whether it's Tyvar and Olivia means that you play a Bloom Tender and be able to activate it right away. So good for the deck. Means you don't have to pass, have to worry about removal. Can feel really good, but I also don't like running Olivia. So,
I mean, to be fair, you have to run some amount of legendary creatures with color pips to get Sisay started. But
yeah,
that doesn't mean you have to run that many in those ones. Like, what's her name? I got her right here. I picked her up for 25 cents just in case I wanted to try her. Freaking Ruby Daring Tracker. All right, this is a red-green legendary creature, 1/2 haste, taps for green or red, and has another pretty relevant ability. I see this in Sisay lists all the time. This is a signet in creature form, okay? This is a signet in creature form. You would not play Talisman of whatever if it costs 2 colored mana. So, like, is it suddenly okay in Sisay because it gives her some colors? Like,
But does it give you protection from werewolves?
It doesn't, actually. That's not that card. You're thinking of something else. You're thinking Catilda.
No, I know the card I'm thinking of. Catilda.
I like Catilda, but no, honestly, it's not good enough for the deck.
Pre-Bowmasters, I think Catilda was, but
I tried
Bowmasters-
Catilda in a lot of decks for a while. The problem is most of your humans are either like Avacyn's Pilgrim and already tapped for mana, or you're playing green and white humans. So it's like she only makes you green and white. She's not that much of a color fixer. And you need another card with her to make her a good ramp spell. 2 mana for, a ramp that you can't do until the next turn is not great. If you have like 2 mana for getting 2 mana back on the next turn, that's pretty good. So like I just think there's enough weird little things with Catilda that like I just don't think she's quite good enough for most decks. Like she's close, but I don't like her in most decks.
I agree. Same with Asika.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I agree.
Up until
Speaking of which, that's in like every Sisei list now, and I can't imagine why.
I don't see it in many lists, but those cards were good, or at least had an argument to be in the list up until Relic of Legends being printed. After that, there's no reason to run those over Relic of Legends.
I mean, Baneslayer's most recent on EDH top 16 has Eska in it.
Oh, does it?
Yep.
Interesting.
Like all the ones I clicked on EDH top 16 real quick, pretty much, not all of them, but like about half of the most recent ones seem to be on Eska. It's like a lot of people are running Eska in there, and like I didn't like it in Joda, and I can't imagine I would like it in Sisei.
I mean, it's a 1/4, which makes it really hard to kill.
Well, yeah, but you have to also want to kill it. Does it do enough to warrant its death? I would say usually not.
I mean, Bowmasters doesn't discriminate. It sees a 1/1.
I mean, Bowmasters doesn't get to kill it for free, but also it's 3 mana and taps for 1.
The flip side is really cute if you can ever get that down, though.
I love casting the Prismatic Bridge. True. I love casting the Prismatic Bridge once in a while in Joda. And hey, that's all 5 colors for Sisei, but come on. You're not winning the game by casting Prismatic Bridge in Sisei.
Honestly, I'm going to give out a hot take right now.
Sure.
Avacyn's Pilgrim should be cut from any list that is more than 3 colors.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I don't think that's all that hot of a take. I'm probably still running it in something 4 colors, but I probably shouldn't be. Most Sisei lists do not run Avacyn's Pilgrim. I think I'm the lone holdout.
Fetch just called you out, Kuma, a lot on camera.
Yeah, I mean, I probably should be called out for playing Avacyn's Pilgrim in 4-color decks. I'm probably wrong to do that. I'm like the holdout. I'm like the one guy who's like, yeah, Bowmasters exist. That doesn't mean dorks are completely useless.
Honestly, Avacyn's probably shouldn't be running most 3-color things, but some of them are worth it.
I'm not so sure about that. 4+, I'm starting to agree with you. I'm coming around. I'm not quite there yet.
The only 1 toughness dorks that I like in Sisei right now are Bloom Tender, of course. And then the Hierarchs, Noble and Ignoble, because they give you 3 colors and Exalted, which is just really cute in Sisei. Being able to attack and then get a +1/+1 from it, so strong.
Yeah, I think it's fair to draw that line in Sisei.
Please tell me you at least run birds. Like, Birds of Paradise.
Okay, no, I forgot birds. Yep, I was wrong. 4 of them then.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Most decks have been off like Llanowar, Elvish, and Mystic and Fyndhorn for a long time. They were still running like Avacyn's Pilgrim, Elves of Deep Shadow because they made you different colors. But I think Bowmasters has maybe pushed Avacyn's Pilgrim and Elves of Deep Shadow out. People are saying it's pushing out Noble Hierarch and Ignoble too. I don't think I'm ready to agree with that one. Although they might be right. I can't 100% say it's wrong, but I do think it puts Avacyn's and Elves of Deep Shadow over the line. I'm not so convinced about Hierarchs and Birds.
Yeah,
it just cements that Deathrite Shaman is the best 1-mana dork in the game right now.
I'm seeing a lot more Delighted Halfling recently. I still don't think that one's worth it, even if it lives through a Dockside. Or not Dockside, a Bowmaster.
Delight Halfling's better with Agatha's Soul Cauldron in Sisei, just because it allows you to make use of that colorless mana it produces.
That's actually very true.
Sure, but like that's not something you're going to set up in the vast majority of games. I don't think I'd put Halfling in for that reason.
I think at this point, if we can keep going on semantics and small little things all day, I think at this point we pretty much made our points here.
Yeah, I've said my piece.
So I think it's time we move on to our closing segment of Bedwed Dead. Before we get into this, I just want to say this is the toughest choice that I have had for any of these. But as makes sense for our topic, we're doing Bedwed Dead of Ad Nauseum, One Ring, and Talion.
This is a freaking tough one, I gotta say, because like I'll say this. I'll start with the easy one. I'm going to dead Talion. And that is not because Talion is a bad Magic card. I am very unhappy to be killing Talion. This is like, shooting old Yeller here. This is not something we're happy that's happening. Like, Talion is an excellent card. If in a world without the One Ring, like, it would be getting a lot more respect. But I just feel like out of Ad Nauseum and the One Ring and Talion is the clear worst card, which is not to diss it whatsoever. So almost by process of elimination, I got to dead the Talion.
If One Ring wasn't printed this year, Talion would have had so much hype around it. But then it's like, it has to compete with such a difficult, oh man.
So, I mean, that leaves Ad Naus and the One Ring for Bed and Wed. And I just want to have a threesome or a polygamous relationship, like, so bad right now. Because, like, I think both of those cards are here to stay. I think despite what people are saying about Ad Naus, it may dip for a while, but that is not a card that's just going to disappear from CEDH. And it shouldn't disappear from CEDH. So it's like I can't not pick that, and I can't not pick the One Ring. I'm like freaking Vizzini and the Princess Bride. I cannot choose the one over here or the one in front of me, and I just I don't even know. Here's what I'm gonna go with. I guess I'm gonna wed Ad Nauseum, not because I am particularly fond of the card. I'm not, but it just has such a track record of reliably winning games and being powerful. That, like, you've got to respect that, right? If you're going to spend the rest of your life with something, it better have a track record of being amazing, right? You don't just, well, I hope you don't just, pick up a girl and then marry her the next day. Like, if you wait a while, make sure she's, everything you want her to be. And I think we're there with Ad Nauseum. I think we will be there with One Ring if we're not going to be soon, but Ad Naus has the bigger track record, so I guess I'm going to wed Ad Naus. Which means
I'm shocked.
I'm betting the One Ring. And I mean, exactly, right? You get into bed with the One Ring, it gives you power, it makes you invisible, it lets you command armies. I mean, what's not to like? Like, the One Ring is phenomenal. Like, I put that in everything. Like, even decks that, like, want to run Oof, you almost still want to run the One Ring, because what if you don't draw the Oof and you do draw the One Ring? Like, it's just that good. The fact that it's colorless means you can play it anywhere, and the One Ring is not coming out of decks until it's banned. Like, I can't imagine they're going to print cards that make us decide we want to cut the One Ring. Like, I just can't even imagine. But like I said, the track record just isn't there. So in an incredibly tough choice, I'm going to have to wed Ad Nauseum and bed the One Ring.
Wow. I did not expect that.
I mean, if it was me personally, I'd probably reverse it. But, like, in terms of, like, overall format, I think it's got to be wed Ad Naus, bed One Ring.
So, I said beforehand, this is probably the toughest one of any of our bed wed deads. It's actually not even probably. This is the toughest of any of our bed wed deads.
I would say so.
Like, I've got to agree with you on deading Talion. Talion is a great card, but Talion is the most, I'll say, restrictive in its uses, not just because of its colors, but also because Talion thrives in the late game, and if you're not expecting to get to the late game, or you're not being like, okay, I'm in a pod where this works really well, or whatever the circumstances, it's not as slam dunk as the other two cards, in my opinion. But Talion is an amazing card, so I'm sad to see it go. And now is where I get a lot of people to yell at me. I'm wedding the One Ring.
I mean, it is a ring. You put it on your finger and say, I do, right?
It's true. I'm giving the ring to the ring. Not because I like One Ring more than Ad Naus, but because I cannot think of a single deck in the game where I would not put the One Ring in it.
It's pretty tough.
Like, I don't care if you're playing stacks. I don't care what you're doing. I can't think of a reason not to run the One Ring. And so I feel like I'm required to wed it because of that reason, because I wouldn't cut it from any of my lists.
It's good reason.
which is heartbreaking because it means Ad Nauseum, one of my favorite cards of all time for any game. I'm not even exaggerating. I love Ad Nauseum so much. Is a bed.
Ad Nauseum, can we just be friends?
Legitimately, I am not exaggerating when I say that Ad Nauseum is one of my favorite cards of all time from any game ever. Like, the way that it makes you play the game, the decks that it enables and does, I love it so much. It fits my style as a player so much. Like, I've played a bunch of different card games. I started off with Pokemon, which I don't know if anyone else has played Pokemon here.
Not
the
for
Pokemon
a very
card
long
game,
time. It's unrecognizable to
the
me.
Pokemon card game makes most the Pokemon card game makes most Magic formats look like it's low power. Like, the amount of card draw and cycling and combos and like all of this stuff for Pokemon is crazy, and Ad Nauseum gives me those feelings, but with the rest of the system that Magic has around
Pokemon has Wheel of Fortune for 0 mana.
It's true.
It also has
You
draw
get a
2
limit of
cards
one
for
per
0
turn.
mana and more busted stuff than that. It has draw 3 cards for 0 mana now, doesn't it? But you only
Draw
get like
3
one
cards
per
for 0
turn.
mana. You only get 1 per turn, and also it's bad.
You hear that? 0 draw 3 cards is bad. Like, holy crap.
Like, draw 2, completely unplayable. Pokemon, wild game. Honestly, I kind of miss it. Part of me wants to go back to it, but yeah, Ad Nauseum, it hits me with the warm fuzzies, and I'm so sad that I'm not putting it as my wed. But One Ring just goes into every deck in the format, in my mind, and so it feels criminal to not put it as wed. And so I'm just left heartbroken here.
So you're wedding the town bicycle.
That is the weirdest way possible to put it. But I guess? I don't know. Neko, come in here.
All right. So the One Ring's obviously the hot topic here, and it's versatile, right? You could put it on your finger, you could put it on something else. Rings can lead to some long-lasting effects. But the One Ring is colorless. It's so versatile. The decks that can abuse it so well that you just so many cards. Seaborn Muse, Teferi, Duretti, like, so many things can make use of this card. Voltaic artifacts are really strong in the format. Like, this card is cracked. The protection is just a bonus, which actually becomes relevant more often than you would think in some games. Really makes some win lines for opponents impossible. So, with all that said, I will have to shame Gandalf. He's there behind me. I'll have to turn him around real quick because I am going to wed the One Ring.
Checks out. Yeah.
Talion is Fae, and for any D&D player out there, you know you don't mess with the Fae.
Facts. Straight up.
With that said, what if it was just for a night? Would that be okay?
No.
This is how they get you, Neko.
Listen, we don't have to say anything. It could just be me. We don't, just lock eyes, go somewhere. No words needed. So yeah, Talion is really making its name in the format right now. It draws so many cards. It's great as a commander, great in the 99. It's more limited because it is in Dimir, so not every deck can make use of it. But Dimir is really good colors in the format. A lot of decks are already in those colors anyway, so yeah, I will bed Talion.
Wow.
Ad Nauseum. So I won't go too long with this because I wouldn't want to talk your ear off, but that's what Ad Nauseum does, doesn't it? It's a talker, right? It just keeps going and going, and eventually it kills you, right? It will literally talk your ear off. And I've just never been a fan of the card. I don't like the strategy of it, so I will dead Ad Nauseum.
Okay.
I don't think the card is dead in the format. I don't think it's going to go anywhere anytime soon, at least. But for me, it just doesn't make the cut in most of my decks.
Well, on this episode of Bedwet Dead, Kuma and I swap places, and Neko has lost her eternity to the Feywild.
Did no one else bed the Talion? I guess not, huh?
No,
Well,
I
nope.
deaded Talion and felt really bad about it. I compared it to Old Yeller.
I guess that's
That
true.
brings
Oh, well.
us to the end. Oh, man. A very rambly episode, a lot of conversation. I hope some people were able to learn some stuff from this, but thank you all for making it to the end. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all of our patrons, especially Frenchie at our Felder Guardian tier. And I realized I need to get an updated list of our patrons because we've got a whole lot more people that I do not have currently in front of me. So thank you to all of our new patrons because there is so many of you now. Like, legitimately, it is wild how big our community has gotten. How, like, I just want to say, I know we had the charity event a couple months ago at this point. It's still crazy to me that we raised $2,000 for charity on top of the event where people were playing for prizes, and like it, our community is amazing and I love you guys, and we couldn't do all this without you. So thank you so much for making it this far. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to go into the comments and tell us who your Bedwet Dead was. Tell us your thoughts on Ad Nauseum, whether it should be getting cut, all that stuff. If you have anyone who loves Ad Nauseum or loves Sisay or hates Ad Nauseum or hates Sisay or hates Kuma, send this to them. And thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you around.
See ya.
I love you, Kuma.
Aw, thanks, Neko. I love you too.